Well, thank you, Christine. Mark, for the. I'm here because of him, in a way, and Graham Hammer, since I was an undergraduate reading about climate predictions, reports from GRDC done by DPI. So that's a 30 years long journey. I'm familiar with UQ that influenced from my climatology background. I know I'm talking about genetics. So it was a journey, and many professors at UQ were quite influential in the way I think and what I do. So it's a privilege to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Sustainable development, at times I hear humans kind of a pest and sustainable development as kind of a marketing thing. And it's all about human well-being. I don't think nobody would sort of set themselves to start destroying the planet. Something that I think is humbling is when you think in retrospect, everything is obvious, right? We should have not pumped too much water. We should have not removed something from land degradation. But I couldn't avoid thinking, particularly as it comes to water, is what if today we have a technology that promised to triple yields using a molecule as innocuous like water? Wouldn't you use it? Later on, we figured out that we didn't use it as good as we could have, but at the time, I'm pretty sure it was a very sensible thing to do. Irrigate the crops and pump the water. It doesn't run it out. We don't even have the means to figure out that they were depleting the aquifers. So in retrospect, it was obvious we are doing all these horrible things, but when you start looking into the future, that's a very, very different story. This would take us a little bit to the sustainable development motivation, but looking at the prediction. So we not sort of tell our stories and convince ourselves, but be very humble that what we are doing today may not be the best things, and use science is the only thing that can protect us from making horrible mistakes. So at the end, it's about human well-being, and this is where take us to question how are we doing. So far, I will give society an A+. Some is looking at me like I'm crazy. Think about half of this world population live in cities of more than half a million people. There's no land. I grew up in Buenos Aires. You can grow food there. There are no cows. There's barely water to drink, water to irrigate, not to mention that. So every day we feed half of the world population by moving food from places like California to New York. That's remarkable. The expectation should be that not 10% of the world population experience hunger. I think it should be the other way around. So I would say we are doing pretty damn good. The problem with that is also we have a plus $10 trillion problem. And this problem comes from all the externalities that some were harder to foresee than others. So one of the motivating reports that, again, I was thinking in transitioning from industry to academia, and was this report. So we need to do better. And this is a part of personal responsibility here, but this in the US is $1 billion a year, $1 trillion a year in human health, another $1 trillion a year in environmental costs. So that put in perspective of the discussion we are having in Congress. So to worry about $1 trillion, we just put it on the drain every single year. And it's about obesity, overweight, non-reportable diseases, food insecurity, in this case less than in other parts of the world, the liver water, soil erosion. So there are many things that are preventable, and there's a lot of us at stake here. The thing is how you're going to break and get through this. And think about a complex system. All these externalities are not independent. It's not that we just stop irrigating crops or adding nitrogen or whatnot. That's a picture from Florida where I live. Once a year, the nice beaches there, you can't even go there. So this is a feedback loop or a system that is really hard to predict by understanding the parts. And certainly in this particular case, agriculture with greenhouse emission, climate change make things a little bit less productive, affects human productivity, and we just dig ourselves into a hole deeper and deeper. The question is how you're going to break that sort of system and disrupt it. And this is where diets come into play. It's not just the energy balance of a plant-based diet or not. It's about disrupting these tremendous feedback loops that we can interrupt that sort of connection between agriculture, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. So the way I think about it is we need to go from the green revolution that served its purpose and bought us a lot of time producing the calories that the world needed at the time and still needs, to a nutritional revolution that now starts tackling problems of environmental health and human health. So far, I think everything has become a little bit obvious, but it's about choices. We listen in many instances. We need more funding, yes. How we get more funding, how you advocate to get more resources, but it's also about choices. It's how we use the resources we have to manage the largest impact we have. And when I was working with my students, I said, well, how are we going to focus our energy? What are the problems we are working on and where? We start looking into different areas. And one of the area that become very clear that it's worth dedicating our time is the tropics, because of the population growth rates, the standardized mortality rate, and this does not include infectious diseases. We're not talking about this is about related to nutrition, and where they're consuming the lowest amount of non-strategic vegetables in a place that probably have the largest impact is most justified. So I think it's bringing over, in terms of choices and focus, how I'm going to spend the time. This is where I'm going to spend the time. The other is the food. What foods I'm going to focus on? Of course, we talk about plant-based diets. I know nothing about nutrition, so the first thing I know is just knock the door on the experts. So I start working with a group, which is a brain health initiative, it would bring together nutritionists, neuroscientists, part of the neurology department at the University of Florida, chefs, which really nice to see the chef talking about foods today, and wellness and habits, lifestyle. Because it's not just about producing the food, it's making accessible, but it's also adopting that. So if you could put a broccoli that they taste when I was a kid, nobody's going to eat it. But if you prepare in a proper way, then you start getting the consumption. The other bit is we produce, at least in the US, broccoli in California. By the time get through all that supply chain, you get your broccoli in Florida and lost all the nutritional properties. It's just simply degradations in essence. It's documented. So again, we start thinking about food. What are the foods? Well, we're informed by this nutritionist from the Massachusetts General Hospital on what are the foods that we need to focus on, what are the health problems we are going to tackle, and also working with the World Economic Forum. What are the companies in the world, what are the PepsiCos and Walmarts of the world that can help us start thinking or rethinking the diets and the products they are going to put in the hands of the consumers. So it's not just they're going to put more in there. Plant-based diet is how you're going to get into the hands of the consumer, actually eat them to deliver the results that we are seeking. So where do we stand in here? Being familiar with the CER system, I think policies are well taken care of, but I haven't seen too much work on fruit and vegetables. So if you look at, there's no CGR fruit and vegetables. There's kind of an associated group. I look, my time to get germplasm from broccoli. How many lines are available for the world for broccoli? 1, 10, 100, 1,000? On the order of 20 for the world. This is the investment on a CGR-like system that we are putting in this $1 trillion problem. So a little bit of perspective of how we are going to use the resources, where we need to put the money. Broccoli, I mentioned, it's a powerhouse. Whatever you look, they have folates and you name it. Blueberries is the king of brain health, and spinach and other are proteins from leafy greens. Very simple. Look at production and sufficiency. The bigger the dot, the more production. If you see a halo, we are doing good. The supply is greater than demand. That's a good situation to be. Let's look at how we are doing with broccoli. So we start mapping the world, and the first thing is there's no halo there, nowhere in the world. So maybe the statistics are wrong, but I think it's pretty reasonable, knowing that California produces 90% of the broccoli in the US, and is the place where the seed companies produce the broccoli for that TPE. Makes perfect commercial sense, but terrible for the world. Spain is the other one, produce all the broccoli for Europe, with a bit of Italy and France. So it looks to me that the trade is not supplying to focal geographies and seems more like privilege than an affordability problem. Simply, there's not enough fruit and vegetables, certainly not in the places that we have impact. Spinach, worse. Blueberries, now we are going to solve the brain health problem with blueberries. With a little bit of help updating some statistics based on where the germplasm in Florida is commercialized, Peru, Chile, all that production goes to the United States. When the United States produces in winter for the American farmer, in the summer is produced in the northern environments and Canada, but everything goes to the US. Morocco goes to Europe. The same, similar story. Where we can have the largest impact in society, there's virtually no production in those geographies. Tomatoes, finally we have halos in here. They're surplus, yes, in Europe, maybe in the United States, but in those target geographies, again, the tropics and the subtropics, the trade does not provide the solution. Yes, we have a problem with sort of making this food affordable, but still there's not enough. So what this takes us is, there's a big elephant in this room, whether we like to see it or not, is the intersection of these focal foods that can address this nutritional crisis we are, or at least address the problem, and the intersection of the geography where we can have the largest impact is zero. So now we start defining the problem where we are going to work. Again, this is a poor problem. If you are too far from California and Spain and the likes, we are in trouble. Now the question is how we are going to increase this availability and access to healthy foods. Seems to be a pretty hairy problem to me, given there's no germplasm, there's no infrastructure, and in the places that we need to do it. However, I think some people figured this out a long time ago. There's Henry Wallace. He was Vice President of the United States. He hired pretty much Bollag. Bollag created the wheat. Swaminathan figured out that he's not going to waste their time dealing with customer border patrol officers to prevent the flow of germplasm. He provides leadership and get the seeds where the farmers and start developing, sort of creating the conditions to have impact. So we have a blueprint, essentially. We bought time, or these leaders bought us time. They have a blueprint. We have a playbook. I think is defining clarity of purpose and direction. It's about strategy, is waiting that time, maybe fruit and vegetables today, focus, execution, and leadership. This is Yoda favorite. I'm a Star Wars junkie, so you do or you do not, essentially, right? We're not trying things here, and there's no time for call to action. We need to execute. And one lesson that it came to me very clearly is you need to think globally, but you need to act locally. I think the CIMMYT example is a very successful one. The system is effective, but it's costly. This is a representation of what essentially Mark put in place in Corteva to create the drought-tolerant maize. I was privileged to be part of developing technologies within this system. We sample environment, you sample germplasm, you screen millions, but it costs about $1 billion, or in the order of the billions, to test million recombinants of maize to deliver 1% a year genetic gain. That's pretty much what it takes. As a person interested in vegetable increased availability, and well, I don't have $1 billion, and I don't think I will ever get that one. Certainly, I cannot test in the field million recombinants, and maybe 1% is not the right metric here. It's just getting the germplasm to be produced in the areas that need to be produced. So we need to think very differently than what industry is doing. However, we can start building upon all our expertise in predictive breeding. So essentially we have predictive breeding, it works, Mark deliver Aquamax worldwide, but these are global data-hungry algorithms. You need to have like a CIMIT footprint, 700 or so locations in the world or more. Maybe it's like 14,000, I think was the last one with Aquamax. So what we think we can do is we have in science, we are, I would say, local knowledge rich. We have experiments that did not tested worldwide, but they were tested in proper conditions. So all that knowledge can be harnessed and reduce the cost, because it's been already paid for, to train these predictive models. So that's why we have this crop model methodology. A student of mine put it in the center, so I honor that prediction-centric view. But at the end of the day, it's about creating and using innovation and mathematics to compensate for our lack of ability to do all the field testing that is required. The second is thinking about experimentation. Yes, company can afford experimentation and sampling, but we need to start thinking about design. We train our students on crop science, experiment design, so we can train locally our models and do global testing predictions and then testing. Essentially, we predict in silico on the billions and we test on the hundreds. And finally, capitalize on AI. I hear some advocate to use AI. There's an opportunity, and we'll talk briefly about that a little bit more. So is this possible? Can focus on broccoli, and this is one of the crops that you can think of. Development, or this development, crop development, this is flowering time, the synchronies between stem and leaf elongations and flower development underpin that maladaptation to high temperature. Essentially, when you grow a broccoli on the left in winter in Florida, you have something people would like to eat and buy. You planted many different genotypes. These are a set of examples in the summer, and they don't look like broccoli, or certainly it is not appetizing. But if you look at these different sort of heads, it's all about the synchronism in development. All these networks are desynchronized. So this asynchrony, it can be selected for. And this is what a very interesting opportunity to build on what's been done here at UQ in flowering time and branching networks. So now we need a framework. It's sort of being a little bit more on the mathematics of how we are going to bring the pieces together. The framework is dynamic. Plants are dynamical systems, so we use difference or differential equations and use statistics to leverage what we learn and we know from the animal science world. AI is a way to solve these equations. The models can be more complex, but you have a feel for what the type of mathematics we are going after. So the solution space is vast, and there may be many different solutions can get you to the same place. And this here is the phenomics, and Aggie is one example that you may be familiar with, is how you can leverage all that phenotyping to start constraining the problem. So now, hopefully you can see there the yellow boxes. Now you can impose some restrictions on what are feasible solutions that are reducing the set of to a much smaller fraction. Can do the same thing with water. If there's no water, or the water availability will put a range of feasible solutions. You can do the same thing with any omics for that matter. Genomics is the one we use to define this relationship matrix. So at the end, you impose mathematical framework, you impose observations, whether it's from phenotypes, from environment, or the genomic level, to now solve a subset causal relationships in the system you are trying to predict. And this is what underpin a lot of the progress in Aquamax. Does it work? Yes. We tested with thousands of hybrids from Mark's breeding program. And you have two options here. One is increase the rate of genetic gain, which is what this commercial company will do, or we reduce cost. In my case, I will take the reduced cost because I want to put germplasm in the hands of the growers in the tropics. So essentially it goes from the inability to deliver to have a method that can put in a position to start having an input. That's the reduced cost pieces that I'm going after, but either way. Great, you did it for maize in a $50 billion company, now probably split. Can you do it the same in fruit and vegetables? So to test that idea. Taylor Sawyer, PhD to your mind, went to Driscoll's, worked with one quantitative geneticists, a team of two. I did, believe my part, sort of sitting some equations there, but it's their credit. They did it. So they took a data set from raspberry. You can imagine the germplasm and the multi-environment trials in raspberry is nothing compared with maize, and they show exactly the same thing. So that yellow bar, that sort of box plot, that is shift relative to any of the other models, the prediction accuracy doubles. And if you look at the breeder's equation, that translates in faster genetic gain, or you can reverse engineer that equation and say, well, how much less money should I invest to maintain that genetic gain, given I doubled the prediction accuracy of my algorithm. So go, insist on the money side here. So we can do it in raspberry, can be done by a PhD student. Now is a matter of how we are going to start deploying these. So predictive breeding is at the core of the solution that we want to deliver. A few references in there in case someone would like to dig deeper in that. The other piece is, well, that's half a problem with health. The other part is, can we breed for improved environmental health and food availability? And here's where we go back to our crop model methodology with the mathematics, and these are schema, this cognitive construct. So they relate processes and integrate knowledge in a causal manner. Essentially, they integrate what we know in environmental science, if you will. So now we can exercise these algorithms, and the breeder, instead of using yield or the quality, they can start having access to what we call extended phenotypes. And one of the extended phenotypes is the environmental phenotypes. You can simulate now one hybrid for what is the yield is going to have, but also how much greenhouse gas emissions is going to produce when you grow this in the multi-environment trials on the farmer's field. Simulation experiment, but it's testable. And certainly, instead of taking a random sample, or even worse, you know there's a connectivity between water use or nitrogen emissions and the yield of a particular genotype. So you can start using this information to select cultivars. One example, we are working with the Department of State. This is kind of one of the things that are left from USAID, is improving grain yield and water productivity. This is a work we are using sorghum as a case study. My apologies for the detour, but this is an example I have to show how we can do that. So we know that to produce more yield, crops use more water. That's biophysics. However, there are different pathways unless you are on that edge of the biophysical limit where you can increase yields by increasing water use or increasing the effectiveness of the water use. Breeding is very effective to get rid of the low-yielding ones, so that sort of hybrid one is going to be eliminated quickly, but when you select for yield, you can select for more water use and maybe not what you are intended to use if you don't want to deplete the aquifers, going back to the beginning of the conversation. So what we do is, again, use this, call it digital twins, so crop growth models, run billions of simulations between the management that is feasible with the genotypic characteristics that are feasible to create, if you will, this cloud of the possible. Not everything is possible. Physics sometimes impose some constraints on us. So now we know what is the space that is feasible, and we can take experiments and overlay where these breeding programs reside. What is the opportunity that now we have to improve the water productivity? Is only one path to increase sorghum yields by using more water, or there are feasible gaps that we can increase the efficiency by which we use that water? The problem is, particularly when you start thinking of working with breeders in Africa, is you can ask to spend $100,000 in equipment that will defeat the purpose of what we are trying to do. But today we have OpenET methodologies using satellite estimated evapotranspiration, so we can start mapping these trials to different sort of places in that evapotranspiration grain yield map. So if the locations are classified as open circles, you're closer to biophysical limits. If you make a selection in those locations, what you're going to increase is water use. If that's what you want, fine. not what I'm interested in. I want to increase water use efficiency or productivity. So the triangles, now you can see there is a gap because these locations, the average yields are way lower than the line that of the feasible. So in these locations, you can select for the use of water more effectively. So this is a reduction to practice. It works. So we'll show you in a minute, and there's a tremendous room for improvement here. Hopefully, the hydrologists will pick that up and start working on improving the way we estimate ET using satellite data. And this is the example. We work with a US company, Corteva Science. We develop the technology. You can see in this sort of these two groups, the open circles are on the right, and the other two groups, if you will, triangles and open circles. My apologies if I put the signs in there, but you can see the crossover interaction. If you select the average, you get nothing or close to nothing. If you select for water productivity, you may be selecting things that are different from the water use. But however, there are some things that the crossover is not too terrible, and you may still have opportunities to bring in those and recombine processes or physiological process to increase both mechanisms. So the target here is work with American companies, develop the technology, and at the same time involve our partners in Israel, Saras, in Senegal, so we can use satellite information for them to classify the environment and start making decisions to improve the resource use efficiency, not the water capture or water use in that matter. Yet they need to run models. You may wonder how you're going to make them run models and the like. So this is where this is one of the moments which is gratifying, and being a professor is when a National Science Foundation intern comes and say, can I develop this national NLP with language models to create this sort of robot to interact with a breeder? Well, in that case, it was a farming decision-making process. Should help yourself. I'm not an expert. Let's give it a try. So what she did, she created this sort of vista. And what it does, other than asking you for your name, is ask the problem, which is indeed the case study was, what is the nitrogen recommendation for my field in Brazil, right? So what it builds is use this natural language program to take that question, go tapped into NASA power, get all the weather data, get the soil data, get the management that the user inputs, and run AppSim and all the simulations with DSAT. Both models are available. Run the experiments and return the output. It's not very good for predicting nitrogen concentration, nitrogen doses, but these systems are designed to learn. So we are in a very good position to start creating systems and using AI to enable AI for breeders to run this in Senegal without having to have an expert programmer in Senegal. Let me reiterate that, because until this sort of smart kid came into my life, that was a severe problem. So this is one of the aha moments that you want to share with the world. Say, you need to nourish these kids because they will surprise you in every corner. So we can do this in breeding. It's a more structural, I think, case. We can create these clouds and inform decisions. We can get the trials connected to the evapotranspiration. Agronomists can start tweaking the management, and we'll leave the farming decisions for another time, because that's a way more difficult problem to deal with. So let's talk and more action. We can have as many COPs as you want, but without having sort of take charge of the situation, we are not going to go anywhere. So this is my journey, and there's some people I like to share my path. Sorry, Dr. Cooper. Yeah, I know, embarrassing moment for you. And build on the shoulders of these giants. I think we have a clear path on how we can do things. Predictive breeding is at the core of how we're going to spend my time to enable and progress gain, or if you will, adaptation of fruit and vegetables. Is about creating germplasm locally, and it could be UF, it could be UQ, a combination of them, or any other center, and do robust genetic evaluation. But we need to have partnerships, one of which is Fontagro. We have networks for sorghum, soybeans, camote, and another on 15 countries in Latin America. So if you do a cross anywhere in Costa Rica, you can test it anywhere. Anyways, the point is we need strategic collaborations and partnerships, and I'm convinced I'm going to spend a fair amount of time working with UQ as I did in the past. Thank you very much. And 30-second extra.
So thanks, Charlie, for a wonderful talk and bringing together the big picture and then some emerging solutions. So we have a few minutes. If there are any questions, we have, I think, a roving mic. So if there are any questions, is there one up the back? Yep. Oh, that's the mic. All right. I'm going to ask a question. I guess one thing, having been involved in a couple of the big CG enterprises, and where a lot of the effort went into centralizing the breeding programs and then outsourcing, if you like, the selection, right? So is your model going to change that kind of model? Is it the way to go for a broccoli to have a global germplasm generation and then distributed evaluation networks? Have you got a thought about that?
That's what is feasible, not necessarily optimal. I think if I want to test, and that's with the robust genetic evaluation, that's where it feeds back in itself. It's an iterative process. To me, is whether Florida UQ can start that process, you can seed it, you develop that germplasm, we can use the crop growth models to think about what are the drivers of adaptation. But this is a system that learns in itself, right? You need to go and test, and that will give the answer whether we need to do more local evaluation or we can centralize it. To me, the starting point is this local germplasm development. When I think about having one breeding program in many countries in the tropics, I think is not feasible, doesn't fit in my head. So that's where the predictive breeding, I think, is going to be key. It's out of necessity than optimal.
We've got a branch of questions. Right.
Charlie, really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much. Look, the crop growth model that's been used for maize or for sorghum is very complex from my mind. It's been developed over decades. Can you just tell us a bit about the raspberry crop growth model that also, when combined with genomic prediction, still was useful? Was it as complex as the other models?
Oh, the raspberry, we keep it very, very simple. Is a couple of logistic functions because we are looking at development, right? We are tackling major drivers of adaptation. At least for Driscoll's, that was useful the case. And fruit and vegetables, there's a lot of development that determine adaptation. So I would say the starting point is there, which is not that different where we started many years ago with Mark with the maize model. The maize model today is way more complex than when we started, but this again is iterative, right? Maybe the germplasm you test in the field, you figure out that the equations are missing, so you bring them back and you add them. But this incremental as breeding is just progressing, which is what is really appealing. You start with a simple model, you do the adaptation to get the phenology right, and go for the next opportunity to drive gain. Maybe it's growth, maybe it's nutritional value. Many of those processes, as we discussed earlier, they're not that complicated. They're relatively simple and understood. So those are the highest impact targets that you go and you build them all as you go. I don't think it would be a mistake trying to build them all and then apply it. You spend all your money there, and it may be a pathway to know. What we learned in Corteva with Mark is that iterative model building. Well, this model has to work for drought first. And so let's figure out what the germplasm is, what are the traits, and go from there. And of course, it's not going to work perfect, but just the question, what is the next opportunity to gain and increase predictive skill? But again, if you got 0.1 predictive skill is more than 0, and you go for the next 0.1 and the next 0.1 and the next 0.1, I think that's the local to global, it can build in that way.
Any more questions out there? I think you've stumped them all on a Thursday. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlie.